In Sweden's capital, cafes are open and restaurants unrestricted, despite COVID-19, because the government here never clamped down. But several months on from Stockholm's first case, fear of the virus and collapsing consumer confidence are clearing out entranceways and emptying tables.
People don't go out and eat. People don't go to restaurants.
Anna Lallestedt's parents opened their first restaurant here more than 4 decades ago, but in the past 5 months, her family's business has collapsed.
In March I had 3 restaurants with 110 employees, and now in the middle of July I have 1 restaurant and I think I have 10 employees left. So I have lost like 90% of my company. So it's been very, very tough.
And while lockdowns ease elsewhere in Europe, Swedish hesitation to spend could mean a financial illness takes hold, much like the virus, according to economist Erik Berglof.
That's the problem with the Swedish approach. That it may have helped Sweden a little bit in the beginning. There's no lot of evidence for this, but in the long term, this can linger for Sweden for quite some time.
Berglof says the stay open strategy to safeguard the economy has not worked.
It's a false choice.
It's a false choice, exactly.
For emergency doctors like Katrin Hryska, the focus of the last few months has never been financial.
It was always about public health. I never had the impression that we had this strategy to save money.
All Sweden's hospitals stayed open and operational, but with the death toll now around 5,500, other metrics matter too.
So I think it is likely that the more liberal policy in Sweden, where, for example, primary schools were open and more workplaces were open, in the early stages of the epidemic meant that Sweden had slightly higher deaths than the Nordic neighbours.
While lockdown measures in neighbouring countries Norway and Denmark saw their death counts flatten, Sweden's deadly curve stayed steeper for longer. And it wasn't just absolute numbers that marked the difference. Death rates per 100,000 people in nearby nations have been much, much, much lower than in Sweden.
People like to compare countries like it's a soccer game or a football game or something.
Stefan Ingves is the governor of Sweden's central bank. He questions comparisons but says his country has struggled to protect younger livelihoods and older lives.
About half of the people who have died were old people, many in care homes in different shapes and forms. And that's a failure, and that's clearly recognized by now that did not work.
Grief still stalks Sweden, but the struggle to survive now is not simply emotional or medical. It's economic too. Willem Marks, NBC News.